Welcome to KansasFest 2019.
Hello. Mark Pelczarski was the founder of Penguin Software, which was later renamed to Polarware. Those companies created a wide variety of games and graphics programs for the Apple II series, for the Atari 8-bits, and for other platforms. The company's programs include, I need this list because it's a long list, the company's programs included Magic Paintbrush, Graphics Magician, Pieman, Spy's Demise, The Spy Strikes Back, and Transylvania, among others. Mark was editor of A Soft Side magazine for a time and editor of the book The Creative Apple, which was published by Creative Computing. He also wrote, Graphically Speaking, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Apple. With that, I give you Mark Pelczarski.
See if this works. Am I on? Cool. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. This is really awesome. For you all keeping this stuff alive, you know, we wrote all this software back in the 80s and, you know, created, you know, what we thought was cool, really cool stuff back then, but, you know, software, it's just all these bits on a 5 1/4 inch floppy, which, you know, they're obsolete, they're going away, and you know, it's like, wow, all the stuff we did is just kind of vaporizing, and then to find, you know, you folks preserving all this and keeping it all alive, it's really cool. You know, it's at one point you feel like your life's work is just, oh, it's gone, but you know, so this is really cool for me to, you know, see the stuff still out there and being preserved by folks like many of you here, Brian. Being a big help here. So thank you. Let's see. We're live streaming?
Yes, we are.
Oh.
Right here.
Hello, world. somebody should write a program like that. And that's the other camera. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's see. This is an Apple IIc running Windows 7. Or tap Apple IIc. A Mac Air running Windows 7. Don't ask. Oh, by the way, as far as asking, I'm going to go through a whole bunch of stuff, and if you got questions, just make a little note, because I'm going to do question and answer later on. I have no idea how long this is really going to take. Steve said there's a schedule change, and I got to fill like 4 hours now till dinner. So I figured I'd start with my grandfather here. And I'm kidding. I'm not going to do 4 hours. So yeah, I'm going to start real short, just, you know, where my family came from and stuff. All 4 of my grandparents came here from Poland in the early 1900s. Yeah, and cool website, ellisisland.org. I was doing some research many years back. If you go to ellisisland.org, they've digitized all the manifests and stuff, and they've entered things in. You can type in names of your relatives, and I was searching Pelczarski, and not getting much hitting, and then I thought, what if I try misspellings, because they typed in stuff that was, you know, handwritten here. Why is that little thing popped up there? Go away. Thank you. Okay. There's my grandfather's name, Grzegorz Pelczarski, except they typed it in as P-E-L-E-Z-A-R instead of C-Z-A-R, so that's why I didn't hit it, so I started misspellings, and it came up. And the manifest got the, you know, the ship they came on, when did they left? Well, he left from Antwerp, Belgium, so that was all really cool. Yeah, he was a butcher. Like I said, all 4 of my grandparents came over from Poland. The other thing interesting there is that Poland didn't exist back then. I don't know if you know that. For 123 years, it had been partitioned between Germany and Russia and Austria. So, I mean, he was born in 1892. Like 100 years before that, Poland was off the map. But they still all identified as Polish. And they all came to the Chicago area. Chicago, at least when I was growing up, they had the second highest Polish population by city behind Warsaw. It was more Poles lived in Chicago than any other city in Poland. other than Warsaw. So anyway, so yeah, at the age of 17, he came over on a ship. My father, at the age of 17, won World War II. My father, at the age of 17, right after he graduated high school, he enlisted in the Navy. And this is true. And he was stationed in Norman, Oklahoma. Think about that. In the Navy, yes. Here's some photos. That's my dad over here, and he's somewhere in that one. But anyway, he was working on airplanes for the Navy, so that's why he was landlocked. But true story, the day he showed up to boot camp, the Japanese surrendered. True story. The day he showed that, see, probably coincidence. I think there were other things involved. But in the Navy, he was an airplane mechanic. He learned mechanics. He went on after that, learned to be a draftsman. They trained him in electronics also, and he went, from that and into various jobs. And he just had a high school education, right? Okay. He got hired by Argonne National Lab. This is not Argonne, but I got hired by Argonne National Lab as a draftsman designer for one of their early atom smashers, synchrotron, ZGS, the zero gradient synchrotron, and that was through the early 60s and stuff. And as a result of that, he actually wound up being one of the first 20 people or so hired by the National Accelerator Laboratory, which is now Fermilab. This is Fermilab out in the west suburbs of Chicago, and he wound up doing a lot of design and engineering work for them on that high school degree. It was, it was amazing the stuff he was doing. This is Fermilab is a particle accelerator. This is the main ring. This is about 1.25 miles across. So the ring itself is about 4 miles in circumference. And oh my God, this thing keeps sliding, so I can't use my mouse, and I hate touchpads. So one of the projects he had, they had to manufacture these big magnets. That's a magnet. It would erase a lot of disks. But they couldn't. They were not off-the-shelf things, so they built a manufacturing facility to make these magnets, and then they had to, let's see what I got here. Then they had to get them into that tunnel ring, and they had to align them like within microns. These big, multi-ton magnets. So he designed this machine that would go around the tunnel, and these arms, and they built this, and would arrange it, and this thing would actually set each magnet, within micron. And here's a picture of this tunnel, inside the tunnel, before it went active in that. But here's all these magnets lined up. One of my early experiences before they went online with this is my dad took me over there and said, "Hey, the way we get around here is by bike." So I was able to bike around the main ring. It looks like that for about 4 miles. So my dad and mom come bring me down there, and thought, "Oh yeah, why don't you try it?" And I'm biking around, and after a few minutes, after a little while, it's like, yeah, okay, it all looks the same. Gee, I wonder where they are. If they have gone upstairs or whatever, I'm going to be going around and around like, where's the exit? But it was pretty cool. So here, one of the puzzles with these magnets, inside the magnet is a tube about like that runs the whole length. And once they got them in place, they had to clean them out very thoroughly. They couldn't have any kind of dust or anything. And so one of the puzzles that my dad's group had was, how to clean this out. they had to pull a line through a whole series of them to be able to pull the cleaning devices through. So they were tasked with that. And one of the guys in my dad's group, Bob Sheldon, was from England. And he said, well, in England, they use ferrets to go down and they like going crawling in holes in that to flush out rabbits and stuff like that. We just get a ferret and let it go through the tube, pulling the string through, and then we could pull our stuff through. So they ordered ferret, and so one day, in our garage, we had a ferret. My dad arrived with big leather, thick gloves, because these things have really sharp teeth. They bite. And we had a ferret living in our garage that he was training with these little sample tubes in the backyard to run through. And so they wound up using Felicia the ferret to clean these tubes. And the Fermilab loved it. Their PR people promoted all over. And there's my dad in Time magazine. And there's Felicia, our ferret, that lived in our garage. So that was in the TV. It was on all the TV stations locally and everything. So anyway, yeah, science. Felicia now, I think. I heard that after Felicia passed away, they taxidermied her, and she's in some museum at Oak Ridge Lab. I haven't seen, but so this is kind of stuff I grew up with. From Fermilab, we went back to Argonne and designed this giant cryogenic superconducting cooled magnet. Let's see, I wrote down what it is. Magnetohydrodynamic power is some project they were doing in conjunction with the Soviet Union. So they were building this big magnet at Argonne and then shipping it over to the Soviet Union. And so when they were done with it, they loaded it into one of these big C5, what are they called? C5 Galaxy. It's huge. These huge planes with multiple wheels on them and everything, and sent it off to Russia. So that's kind of the environment I grew up with. One nice part about that, we started out in the close-in suburbs of Chicago. Argonne and Fermilab were way out, so we moved out in the farther suburbs, and I wound up in a pretty good school district. That we get to computers. My high school had a computer. This is 1970. This is not this is the same kind of computer. It's not my high school, but it looks very much like what one of the rooms in our high school looked like. We had an IBM 1130 computer, and they had a computer math class, two semesters worth, and that's where I learned programming. That's where I started out. I learned Fortran 4 on punch cards. Let's see. This was I think that's probably the memory unit, and stacks of punch cards. I assume many of you know what punch cards are, and some of you have maybe seen them. And little lights over here. Whoever's running the program, we'd submit our deck of cards, one line of code per card, and they'd run it through, and an hour later or so, pick up your printouts, and often scrawled across the front was Foo9, F009, because the lights would light up on, off, on, off, on. Yeah, that was the error code for some kind of I/O error that was real common. So you get your code back, Foo9, Foo. Let's see, what else do I have here? Oh, here's a picture of a punch card with a Fortran statement on. If you have never used these things, some of you are younger. One line of code per card. You put in this big typewriter thing on steroids, a little stack of cards, and he feeds in one card at a time, and each character gets typed in, and it punches holes, and and the card reader will read the holes as those characters. But one line of code per card, and so you wind up with a stack of cards with your program on in sequence. Don't drop it. Don't, especially in college, you have a box of cards for the longer programs. Don't drop that. And they would feed them through. And let's see, back here. So yeah, I said that I think this refrigerator size thing was the memory. This thing had 32K of core memory. I scanned this thing. This is core memory. You can see the bits. I'm going to pass this around here.
No one's ever going to need more than 32K.
Huh? But
no one's ever going to need more than 32K.
Oh God, no. Yeah. So yeah, this is. I scanned the card and then I scanned it at real high resolution. These little donut rings around the wires, and they would. I guess if you ran a charge down, any vertical and horizontal, they would crisscross at one bit and change the polarity of that bit. So the vertical wire, it's going to hit all these, but not enough charge to change them. Horizontal wire is going to hit all these without enough charge to change them, except where they intersect. Oh, there's enough charge to flip it. So yeah, you pass it around. You can actually don't do this. I did it in the past. You can actually scrape it off and look at little bits in your finger. If you all do that, there'll be no memory left. So anyway, that's what I learned on. What else? Oh, it was 1970. So my teacher, Paul Halleck, he was out of University of Illinois. Also probably about 10 years before me. But he designed this 2-semester course in programming, and flash forward 30 years, I'm teaching college programming. All the way up to like 2010, 2012, I was teaching computer science. And what amazes me is that in those 2 semesters in high school, I learned pretty much everything that I was teaching in 3 semesters, the first 3 semesters for a computer science major in the 2000s. It was pretty awesome. I was on a statewide committee through Illinois, and I worked with the people at U of I and NIU and all the different universities, and we were working on a transferable degree so that people could start at a community college and transfer to any of the state universities. We worked on a Common Core for the first couple of years, and that worked out really well. But yeah, the first 3 semesters of that, the bulk of it was stuff that Paul Halleck taught me there. So Paul, if you're watching this, thank you. I've thanked him a few times. So when I was 17, my dad saved the world at 17, World War II. My grandfather came over here on a ocean liner, and when I was 17, I went to University of Illinois. I was the first one in our extended family who went to college. We had that chance, and I majored in mathematics with an eye toward teaching. I was sufficiently impressed by some of my high school teachers, thinking that would be a cool thing to do. But since I had this experience with computers in high school, I also wound up taking a lot of computer science classes as my elective core. Basically had a computer science minor there. While I was there, let's say, so I was in a teaching track, I decided to kind of flip my semesters around. I wanted to make sure I really wanted to teach. So instead of waiting for my final semester, senior year, to do the student teaching, it turned out I was able to do that my second semester junior year. So, okay, well, I'm going to try this then and just make sure that, actually getting into school and doing that, this is something I want to finish up, another whole year with. Instead of switching around. So I wound up student teaching my junior year, but the way the schedule was arranged, it was a really light schedule for the first half of the semester of your student teaching year, because most of the people were seniors and they were getting their portfolios ready and applying for jobs and stuff like that. So there was a lot of downtime. So I was looking for some kind of course I could take those first 8 weeks, and turned out there was a course in computer-assisted instruction in the College of Education. It was an 8-week course, fit right in. The problem was it was a graduate course, and I was an undergrad. So I went to the guy that was teaching it and said, yeah, is there any way I can sign up for this? Well, I had to be a graduate student. But he says, I have a solution. I'm going to admit you into our graduate program. So here I am, my second semester junior year, and I'm a graduate student, and like, oh, cool, I can sign up for any graduate courses I want when I finish my undergraduate degree. And then even better, after that was, I'd been programming, so they were doing computer-assisted instruction stuff. This guy knows some programming already. Yes, cool. They then hired me right after my student teaching. So before my senior year, they hired me as a grad assistant. So I was a teaching assistant, grad assistant in the College of Education. And the cool part about that was I had my own office in the ed building with a key. And I've got notes here, make sure I don't skip over stupid things. Okay, good. And in the adjacent room to my office were 8 Plato terminals. This was a networked computer, and where's Peter? There, he's actually going to be doing a session on Plato on Friday afternoon. They've taken the old Plato stuff and they're doing emulators on the 2 and 2GS and stuff like that, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so this guy, the teacher that took me in the graduate program, his name was Bruce Hicks, and so he's my graduate advisor. Interesting thing I found out later, he actually had come from the physics department, was kind of interested in this computer education stuff, but he started out in the physics department, and he actually had his degree in physics from Caltech, where his graduate advisor was a guy named Linus Pauling. So yeah, my graduate advisor, his graduate advisor, Linus Pauling, like wow. Anyway, around this time, he was also kind of tuned into these microcomputer things showing up, and he showed up one time with this newspaper thing called People's Computer Company, and got me hooked on that when the first microcomputers coming out. The guys on the West Coast, I think it was Albrecht and Felsenstein, started publishing that. So I got an early subscription on that, and also Creative Computing, Dave All's early versions of that magazine. Meanwhile, yeah, we had these 8 Plato terminals just outside my office, and I can get there all times, day and night. These things were networked computers. There's a plasma panel screen, but the cool thing is they were networked all over the world. They had, it was centered at U of I, but they had labs out in Arizona, I think Arizona State. I think, by my memory, I think they had labs out in Soviet Union at the time too. I mean, there were people on this network all over the place, and it was ostensibly for doing educational stuff. They were writing educational software, but there were also games. People discovered they can write multiplayer games on these. So I spent a lot of late nights playing Moon War and things like that on networked computers, and playing against other people on these computers, somewhere else in the world. This is 1975 or so, and I'm playing these graphic games. You challenge someone else, and God knows where they're from, and playing 2-person games over networks on these things. So. That kind of came into play a little bit later, but yeah, so that was my background at U of I a bit. Where do we go from here? And I wound up teaching math at Sycamore High School up near DeKalb, Illinois. That was my first job out of college. And one of the reasons they hired me was to start a computer programming set of courses, which we did. We got a timeshare terminal that was hooked into local college with, let's see, that's the back of my head. That's me. We connected with a telephone modem. Many of you have seen these. Some of you may have not. I don't know. Just, you know, a dial-up handset. You know, these phones. You know. The ones where you turn, you know, put one in front of some, you know, millennial now. Here, call somebody. What do you do with it? So, you know, you dial up and you get, you plug it into the handset and connect. So that's what we used for teaching programming to start with. And, you know, we shared it in among the whole class. And actually, before we even got that terminal, I think this was the second semester I was teaching, we got that thing finally in. The first semester, I started a computer club, and just basically, you know, after school, a couple days a week, they would come in and I'd teach them programming just on the chalkboard. You know, here's how it works, and you just, you know, do it all theoretically without an actual computer. And one of the local universities, you know, in November or December, had a programming contest for the local high schools. And so we entered it. And so we got there a little bit early, you know, about 45 minutes an hour early, and took my students and said, here's an actual computer. Now, now you can touch it and try it and see. I think they came pretty close to winning the programming contest. I think they came in like second or something like that. Yeah, without ever having touched a computer till that morning. These things came out, and they were pretty cheap. And so we got a couple TRS-80s. So instead of just having one terminal to share, we could, you know, have like 3 TRS-80s, and it was actually a pretty good computer for teaching BASIC. One thing I kind of liked about this is as a teacher, in retrospect. See, later on I was teaching in colleges with, you know, college labs with everybody sitting with a computer in front of them. And you talk about something and you know, tell them, you know, to try you know, writing a little program, do this or that. First thing, start typing. Like, no. You know, this was kind of cool, you know, that, you know, I had 25 students sharing one terminal or a couple of TRS-80s. They had to sit down and think about it first. Or even the Punchcard deal, you know. You write a program on punch cards, and you know you're gonna turn it in, and you gotta come back in an hour or two to see the printout. It's not like run, oh, gotta fix that error. Oh, run, oh, gotta fix that error. Oh, run. You know, I think that was in a lot of ways a better way of teaching programming. Yeah, I don't know. It seemed to me that was a little bit. Okay, so one day at the high school, the end of the day comes along, and the home ec teacher runs up with a student say, Mark, you got to come down to the home ec rooms. We need to take your photo. Like, what? Newsweek had just come out. The government class, I guess it was the government teacher, took me to the home ec room. Anyway, Newsweek had just come out, and with this cover, and they're all saying, "That's Mark. That's our teacher." Okay, so by totally coincidence, I was wearing a sweater that day over a white T-shirt. I had tan pants on. I had a black watch. I mean, this is all just, you know, one of those old LCD watches, but it was all black. And so they took my picture and they sent it into Newsweek. Like, look, here's our you know, and a week or two later, Newsweek actually printed it. And so yeah, my dad made time. I'd be in Newsweek. Okay, it wasn't all just computer. I also coached softball. So I was just, nerd on computer all the time. I had actually coached Little League baseball for quite a few years in high school and college. And so when I got hired there, one of the first things I asked you, like, okay, we need all teachers to be involved in some kind of extracurricular sports or activity. What would you like to do? And I said, oh, I know how to coach baseball. He said, oh, we already got baseball coaches. But you can coach girls softball. I'm like, girls softball? I'm like, how do I? Okay, sure, fine. What would you like, varsity or JV? Okay, well, I'll do varsity. I'll figure this out. They actually went undefeated. We finally lost in the sectionals for the state tournament, but it was kind of bizarro. It was real early in girls sports when they first started. And a shout out to Sycamore High School. I'm sure they're watching this. The Sycamore High School girls softball team this year won state finally, first time. Yeah. So yay! Not this team there, but. And actually, I still have several of these people on as Facebook friends. So this thing came out, and I know a couple of previous speakers talked about, wanting to buy a pet. I think Roger said that last week, or last year, wanted to buy a pet, but they were out, or something like that. I don't know. I actually went out and bought a Commodore Pet. They were about half the price, or maybe less, for than an Apple. The one with a little chiclet keyboard, and started fiddling around with it. And I wrote a little football simulation. And there was this cassette magazine called Cursor, so I sent it in to them, and they published it. So that was my first published program. They sent me a few bucks for printing it, and amazingly, these are screen images I found online last week that's still out there somewhere. So you can actually find the Commodore Pet football game that I wrote, which was, I had the Pet for about a month. I think about 3 weeks into it, I sent off the football game. About another week later, something was acting weird, and checked it out. There was actually a bug in the ROM. It was something that was supposed to, I don't remember what it was, but it was clearly, this is not supposed to be doing that. This doesn't work properly. So I took it back to the store and returned it, and they gave me a refund. So that was my experience with the Pet. But that was my first published program. And then, in 1979, I got married in the summer, and I had been teaching, besides the high school, I'd been teaching some night classes at the local community college in programming. So I'd be teaching one night a week. And after we got married, we had a week delay before we can go on our honeymoon trip. We were actually just going camping, but we had an extra week. So I called there over the community college, said, hey, this next year, keep your ears open. If you hear of any colleges that are hiring for teachers, I might be interested in switching over from high school into teaching computer science. And he says, you know what? Northern's looking for somebody right now. This was, end of July. Yeah, end of July. So NIU was looking for somebody to teach. I lived in DeKalb. That's where NIU was, and the high school I taught was, a few miles away. So I go over to NIU and interview, and say, sure, we'll hire you. Like, oh, okay. Suddenly I'm a university professor or whatever. I had gotten a master's at U of I, so I was actually head of education there. That was because I was able to take grad classes at the same time I was taking undergrad classes. So I actually wound up in 4 years plus a couple summers doing the master's thing. So, but anyway, because I had a master's, they said, yeah, you can teach here. Here, we'll assign you these two classes, Fortran and COBOL. Like, okay. Fortran, no problem. COBOL, yeah, I've heard of that. So our camping trip after our wedding, we took turns driving, and whenever she was driving, I'm going through a COBOL book going, quick, and like, oh, is that all? What? You know, I learned enough to teach it, but you know, it's like get all these places where like, well, what if you want to do that? What do you turn out the answer to what if you want to do that? What if you want to do that? Is oh, then you write an assembly language subroutine to do all the stuff that COBOL doesn't do. I didn't like COBOL, but it was fun teaching it. Another benefit of teaching at NIU was a bit lighter teaching load and not all the extracurricular stuff. You know, no coaching sports. I was coaching a couple sports and stuff like that. So I had a little more time on my hands. And so I used that opportunity to buy one of these. Yay, finally, we got to something useful. So yeah, that's when I bought an Apple II and started fooling around with it. And of course, you know, the first thing with the Apple II that's different than anything I've used before is it's got color graphics. I've never done stuff with color graphics. Let's play with that. And so I wrote this little paint program. And I was doing a little, use shape tables, do this little Space Invaders simulation, put a whole bunch of little things together. And meanwhile, I'm going into the local computer shops. You know, local half-hour away there, and you know, an hour away that way. There weren't that many at the time. And I noticed that on their walls, they had these baggies with diskettes in them, with you know some sheets of paper and stuff like that. They were selling software. Like, oh, you could buy this flight simulator thing, and you could buy this. Okay, and they were just Ziploc bags with the discs in them. I thought, well, I could do that. So I took my little drawing program and typed up some instructions and copied some discs. I thought, well, maybe they'll give me something for this. So, you know, I took a few over to the first computer store and said, like, you know, my Apple's only got 32K of RAM. I'd really like to have 48K. Would you give me a RAM upgrade for some of these? And they did. Like, ooh. So I thought, well, I'll try this again. And then went to another store with a stack of 10 or 12 of them and said, I'd really like a printer. You know, if I give you some of these, would you give me a printer? They did. And you know, for the next several months, I'm like going to the computer store, like, oh, toy, oh, a toy. I'll trade. You know, it didn't really, at that point, didn't sink in that people would actually give me money, but they were giving me fun things. You know, so I had lots of fun toys on my Apple. Let's see. I even have. Here's a picture of it. There's the photocopied manual of MP Software. It was really creative there. MP Software, Graphics Package Plus, and a little drawing thing, and a little slot machine simulator, and I don't know, I think there was the Space Invaders thing. I had a couple little games. It all fit on the disk, so they threw it all on there. And that's how I got all my little expansion toys for the Apple II. So, I'm thinking that, maybe I want to take a little break from teaching for a while, just do some other things for a bit. I really enjoyed teaching, but, I knew I can get back into it. Okay, university will hire me, on the spot. Oh, no problem. I know how to teach computer programming. There'll be jobs. And thought, what do I want to do? What do I want to try doing? And I thought, well, it'd be really neat, like Creative Computing magazine. It'd be really neat to write for something like that because they get to play with all the toys right away, when they're first released. And so I was thinking about that, and that'd be kind of cool. Yeah, I'd done some writing already back in my graduate school days. So I'm thinking along that line, and then I was in a computer shop one day and ran across this little digest thing called SoftSide. It was a little magazine for the TRS-80 that had listings of programs you could type in. But in the, I don't know, it was on the front or the back, it says, we're going to start an Apple II edition. We're looking for an Apple II editor. Like, ooh, I could do that. So I called them up and said, hey, I'm interested in doing that, and went out there and they hired me. And so I finished teaching the semester and wound up, Cheryl and I moved out to New Hampshire for a bit, and I was editor of a magazine like that. You know, oh, now I'm editor of Softside. And I think I got a picture of Softside. Here's one of the early Softside magazines. This is actually, we went to full size then. We started with the digest ones, and we went to the larger one. And that's actually one of Cheryl's illustrations. My wife Cheryl's illustrations for the cover of that one. And anyway, so I'm in New Hampshire writing for a magazine. I had a couple columns I'd write, and but one of the other cool things is that all these other people who are writing these software packages and trying to get them out there are sending them to me so I'd review them in the magazine. So I got copies of, like, this guy Doug Carlson wrote this Galactic Saga trilogy on cassette. It was called his company Broderbund or something like that. And Ken and Roberta Williams sent a disc with something called Mystery House, with a company that they're naming Online Systems. And Scott Adams, his adventures are on cassette. And so I'm getting all this stuff and look like, wow, this is kind of neat. I can do this. So, let's see if I'm missing anything here. Yeah, okay. Also in the meantime, that MP software graphics package, Softside also had a software and hardware division. They sold mostly TRS-80 stuff, not too much in the Apple area, but they wound up publishing it for me. They renamed it something a little more clever than graphics package. They named it Magic Paintbrush, and so they sold it to Softside magazine and paid me royalties and all that stuff. And make sure I'm in the right place here. I think so, yes. So anyway, they're publishing Magic Paintbrush, and I'm doing the writing for the magazine. And we get letters to the editor all the time, about this program doing that funky or this, whatever, and somebody wrote in, and we're doing this on a late Friday afternoon. Somebody wrote in with a legitimate question, but then they had a postscript on their question. So I was answered the legit question, whatever it was. But the postscript was, oh, does the MP and MP software, does that stand for Mark Pelczarski or Magic Paintbrush? Like, well, I'd never thought of that. And being a late Friday afternoon, I said, oh, neither. It stands for Magnificent Penguin. And that just, this is just out of the blue. I blame it on Monty Python, another MP. But I was, college, I liked all the Monty Python TV show, and they had the penguin things like the penguin on the telly that blows up, and the giant electric penguin and stuff. There's weird penguin stuff going on. So apparently that made an impression on me, and just out of the blue, I just said, oh, it's Magnificent Penguin. And Elaine Cheever, the graphic artist for the magazine, actually did a little illustration next to my answer. And this would come back to haunt me in various ways. And you can't read this, I'll zoom in. One of the other, when Brian was working on this with me, and one of the things new edition of Graphically Speaking, and it doesn't say Portrait of an Artist as a Young Apple, because that was not my idea, that was Softalk's idea, and I never understood that. So now it says Programming Graphics on your Apple II, which I like better. Anyway, so I was looking up old stuff for that, and I found an old Softside article. It was actually after I left Softside, but I was still writing for them. I had a column, and since it was no more letters to the editor thing, I called the column, I Don't Think We're in Kansas Anymore, which suddenly seems even more appropriate. But this was, when was this? Do we have the year on that? It was like... I
think it's 81.
Yeah, it was early 81. Like February 81. And this is, Brian put it in here, this whole column. But it was, it basically was Mark rambling about stuff. And in this one I was rambling about, 8 years earlier, in high school, I used a slide rule for my classes. We had that computer, but as far as physics class and all that, we had slide rules. When we went to college, my roommate, who was in physics, he bought a TI calculator. It could add, subtract, multiply, and divide, and do squares and square roots, I think. And it was like $150. Yeah, and the next year, I finally needed one for my science classes, and for $150 I got one that did sines and cosines and all kinds of other functions. And so I was kind of going on about how things had changed, and where are things going to go in the future. And so this is like 81. Before I even started Penguin Software, I'm talking about where are things going to go? Well, teleprocessing, what's going to bring computers into the home. Tomorrow's phone will be a computer. And you'll be able to access more information than you could ever possibly need. This is 81. See, I'd seen Plato, so I kind of had the picture of this networked system. And what other advances can we expect in the meantime? Memory, lots of it. And actually, my term I used, Googles of it. And well, they're nice. I'm exaggerating. How many 100K do you want? Yeah. Well, yeah. If I had said megabytes or gigabytes or terabytes, I'd have to spend another paragraph explaining what those things were at that point. Yeah, no fuss. They'll be talking and listening too. Good thing you can pull the plug. So that was my prediction of the future. Well, not too bad. There's a few goofy things in there that didn't quite match. But also, this thing about Googles, as I'm reading this thing, I had visions. I looked at Sergey Brin and Larry Page would have been 8 years old. So I'm reading this thing, having visions of, I wonder if 8-year-old Sergey Brin read this and got the idea for naming Google from that. Probably not, but it's possible. If any of you ever meet them, ask. Okay, so what happens next? Oh, okay, so I was at Softside Magazine and getting all these programs submitted that were pretty cool and thinking, yeah, I can do this, and decided that, yeah, I could do this. And so my wife and I moved back to Illinois, near family and friends and stuff, to start our own business. I wasn't quite sure I can, be self-sufficient with just publishing software. In fact, that was almost an afterthought at that point. Softside did have this pretty big mail order business in TRS-80 stuff. And I thought, well, there's really nothing like that for Apple right now. And I had been a member of this company that had started on the West Coast, REI. You may have heard of them. But at that point, they had their original store in Seattle, and their second store in Berkeley, where I had spent some time. And recreational equipment incorporated co-op, REI co-op, and it was a membership co-op, and it was for outdoor gear, camping stuff. But the cool thing about it is their catalog. It was not your typical catalog. It was reviews of stuff, and they only carried good quality stuff, merchandise. They field tested everything, and they would not sell junk, and they stood behind it. And when you're reading the catalog, they explained, the differences between different products. It was very informative, and so I thought, well, that would be a kind of cool model for doing mail order software for the Apple. So this is what kind of spurred me on to start, see if I got the slides right here, micro co-op. So this is actually what we planned on doing when we moved back to Illinois. Is we had this newsletter that we were doing mail order Apple software. We'd review stuff, and we were only going to carry stuff that was quality. Oh, that slide in back, that was my tent in that slide. I mean, REI was so cool that about 10 years later or so, these had fiberglass poles, and they started cracking, the fiberglass started cracking in the ends and stuff like that. So we had a vacation out in Berkeley, so I brought the poles back there and said, hey, can I get replacements for these? You know, kind of buy a new set of poles. And they took a look at them, and they said, oh, we're making these out of aluminum now. Here. Just, you know, yeah, no, they didn't charge. They're like, oh, yeah, no, these are no good. Here's better ones, and they just automatically replace the stuff. So, and REI is still around. They're still a good outfit. A little bit expensive side, but good stuff. So I kind of blurred that out because I just wanted you reading it all. We published this newsletter, which had reviews of software. I had, you know, all these people that I was reviewing stuff from Softside Magazine, you know, Carlston and Ken Williams and whoever else, you know, send me stuff. I'll write up the good stuff and, you know, set us up as a dealership. And we started doing mail order software. And that actually was going pretty well. And in the meantime, actually while I was setting this all up, I thought, well, I got that graphic stuff. So, you know, I messed with this for a little bit, but then, you know, half the day I'd be playing with the graphics and kind of refining that old Paint program and making it better and better. And actually, that made its way out first, and I wound up publishing it as co-op software. So I have that. That's next, right? The complete graphic system. Clever, and I was never really good at names. Your first product, complete. Oh, wait a minute. Anyway, it had a paint program, it had the shape table editor, had this 3D wireframe thing where you can design 3D figures and rotate them and stuff like that. I can't remember all the little things. Wound up figuring out ways to dither the colors, so instead of the, you know, regular 6 colors, you had, you know, 100 different, you know, different dithered patterns. So I wound up taking out an ad in here it is. Took an ad out in Softalk magazine. I kind of skipped over Softalk coming out. That came out while I was working at Softside, a specific Apple magazine. And yeah, for $600, jump off a cliff here, you know, $600 for an ad. Put in a 3rd-page ad into Softside magazine to sell this thing while I'm getting micro co-op all set up. And people started sending me money. Checks, we were living in an apartment, you know, and checks started arriving in the mailbox every day, you know, $60, $60, $60. Like, ooh, this is good. I like this. It was actually more than a $600 commitment too, because you had to commit to like 3 months to get that rate. And even by the time this thing got published, the next one's in production. So, you know, it was more like a $2,000 commitment. But it apparently worked out. So I had this first thing I published as co-op software, a little penguin in the logo kind of managed its way in there. Let's see, where to go from here? Oh, yeah. That's Cheryl and I. We took it over to the Boston Applefest and had our first trade show booth. That's 2 pictures kind of composited together, but they weren't lined up. Yeah, it looks kind of goofy. It's just I just overlaid one image over the other. That was our first booth at the Boston Applefest. I think it was the first Applefest. That's where I met Ken Williams personally. And, oh yeah, ran into a guy, Mitch Kapoor, who I had met earlier through Softside. He was one of the guys working for VisiCorp. He had done some, is there a database, I think. I can't remember the name of it. No, the VisiCorp's database. Doesn't. Visifile, yeah, I think he had done that. But anyway, I ran into Mitch, and when we're talking, and they're like, "Oh, what are you up to now?" I'm like, "I can't tell you, but it's really pretty big. It's going to be pretty cool. You'll find out soon." It turned out he was writing Lotus 123 for the IBM, and yeah, Mitch did well with that. So yeah, anyway, so that was our first trade show, and sold a bunch of software in that. And then creative computing. They did a review that summer of graphics software that was out there. It's like, you know, he reviewed maybe 3 or 4 different graphics packages at the time. The guy who wrote the review was David Lubar, who was on their editorial staff. And in that review, he headlined our little section, Penguin Graphics. Mark Pelczarski, alias the Magic Penguin, it was actually Magnificent Penguin, he got it wrong, but alias the Magic Penguin. You know, that was our section of the review, Penguin Graphics, like, okay. And meanwhile, you know, co-op software is doing a whole lot better than micro co-op. That's, you know, here's micro co-op. He's going like this. Co-op software is going, it's like, well, maybe we should name that something else. So Roger Wagner threw down the gauntlet last year. I got to take a quick break here. That's how Penguin Software got to start. Yeah, I keep checking my notes. There's some of these I want to talk ahead of time on. So over the next year, we produced 3 fairly successful software packages. David Lubar, the guy who wrote that review, it turns out he was a machine language hacker, was playing around, and so we actually wound up corresponding a lot and exchanging ideas. And you know, he had ideas for how to do their computer paintbrushes, and he wrote all these little routines for doing screen manipulations and some cool stuff. And by the fall, we together put out a program called Special Effects, which is the more complete graphic system. Actually, it wound up being eventually combined into what Complete Graphic System 2. But Special Effects was a whole bunch of other drawing tools for doing paintbrushes, actual dithered paintbrushes, and all kinds of screen flipping and imaging and rotating and stuff. I don't remember all the details of it. There's some other kind of shape table that he came up with too. So both those things did pretty well. They were on the Softalk bestseller list and stuff. And then he's, the way we did this, I mean, this was before internet. So, you know, we'd talk on the phone, you know, those old handheld phones, and mail discs back and forth. You know, that was our internet. You know, throw a 5 1/4-inch disc in the mail. And yeah, I remember when he was talking about the drawing thing. You know, oh, it'd be nice to be able to do some shading over here, like this and that. And like, oh, you know, like dithered paintbrushes, and like, oh, I actually got some routines like that I've written for doing the text anywhere on the screen. I just have to change the text into blobby patterns, and instead of text now, they're paintbrushes. So, you know, he was on the phone one night, and, you know, threw that idea out there, and that night I just put some blobby paintbrushes together, sent it off to him, and like, there we had our paint program. But he also was talking to, through his work, talking to a lot of Apple developers, and, you know, was interested in animation and that, and he started writing these routines for doing fast animation, pre-shifted shapes and all that kind of stuff. And had actually, you know, so we started looking at, you know, stuff that goes into the games, stuff like that. I was also playing around. I was just kind of interested in how Ken Williams had gotten all these graphics into Mystery House and Wizard and the Princess. And so I had all these routines. I thought, well, if I put them together in this other way, instead of saving the bitmap image, taking the full block of memory, I could just, as people are drawing, I could just, save basically vector graphics, you know, a line from here to here. Well, that command takes, you know, 6 bytes. And, you know, line to here, and you just save each action that the artist is taking, or, you know, fill this area. 3 bytes. So, and paintbrushes, you know, each part of the paintbrush. So it was able to get graphics down into, you know, a very compressed state. And if you've played Transylvania or stuff like that, you've seen the graphics come on. What you're seeing when the graphics come on is actually the artist drawing it. You know, if you slow it down, you're seeing the actual actions the artist took in drawing. In that case, with Transylvania, it was Antonio Antiochia. But that was another part of Graphics Magician, is the program for doing these vector graphics that now, instead of storing, what was it, 9 or 10 images on a 140K disk, I don't remember what it was, small amount. You know, we were able to get 50, 60 of them, and, you know, do some cool adventure game and educational applications with that. We're still trying to figure out how to get Dave's animation routines, the machine language stuff he was writing, into a format that non-programmers could use. The idea behind developing Graphics Magician was to put together all these machine language tools that can be used by somebody just learning AppleSoft. You can load in our routines, just do a B-load of our stuff, and call machine language routines to parts, but you can write the code in AppleSoft. So we're trying to figure out how to do the animation part in that. We were, let's see, we were on the West Coast. We were in San Francisco, probably for the West Coast Fair or something like that, one of the computer shows. And I went up to Doug Carlson's house in San Rafael. That was Rotorman headquarters, his house. And you know, stopped over there to visit. And go in the living room, and there's Gary Carlston sitting in a lounger, Apple on table either side, 4 disk drives on the arms of the lounger, duplicating Rotorman disks in the living room. That's how it was done back in the day. Off in one of the bedrooms, a guy named Chris Jochimson was writing some programming, and so, you know, when we're talking to him, and he's showing me this program called Space Quarks that he was finishing up, and then he, you know, showed me how he did it, and you know, boom, light bulb goes on. To make this thing work, he you know, had, you know, the basic machine language animation routines, but he created paths in memory. You know, just you know, byte by byte or nibble by nibble, you know, this direction, that direction, that direction, and then just had his shapes following these predefined paths. And you can also, you can say, oh, we'll change into this path or what. So, you know, he had this whole idea of path tables, which, boom, that was the magic sauce to, get Graphics Magician, the animation part of it, working, is to work that in. So basically, for that afternoon of, I said, hey, Chris, can I use this? And he said, yeah, sure. And he was actually, he had the idea of going with the arcade machine. He was starting work on that, too, at the same time, which is a similar type concept. But anyway, for that, he was the 1/3 author of Graphics Magician. So Dave did these animation routines, and I did kind of the basic editor stuff for creating the shapes and the paths and putting it all together. And so Graphics Magician came out in, what was it, 82 now? 83? I don't know, I consulted Wikipedia. It told me when things released. 82. Graphics Magician, Complete Graphics System Special Effects came out in 81. So within about 10 months, had these 3 programs out, and they were pretty consistently on the Softalk bestsellers list for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. I don't know. So it was pretty good run right there. Graphics Magician, our deal with licensing it was basically you can use these machine language routines for free. All you have to do is put on your package or on your title screen, graphics created with Penguin Software's Graphics Magician. Lots of good advertising. So, and basically throughout the years, pretty much almost every company published some stuff using Graphics Magician. Not everything, obviously, but I know Ken Williams was particularly loath to putting, created with Graphics Magician, Penguin Software. Like, oh. No, Ken, you have to do that. No, that's part of the deal. Let's see. Oh, okay. The artist for this, and he also did the Transylvania cover. Guy named William Giese. He went on to do graphics and album covers to the Grateful Dead later on in the 80s. Did a whole, look him up. He's got all kinds of artwork for the Grateful Dead. And let's see, someone was asking about some tricks, maybe, fitting things in memory and on disk. In these things, we used a lot of self-modifying code where, the assembly language would alter instructions a few bytes ahead to do this or that instead of writing a branch and repeating code, having this set of code here, this set of code there. It would just say, modify these couple bytes, and now it's just a straight line code, and we saved both bytes and had additional speed. Another trick we used was we actually used a lot of AppleSoft BASIC. These things weren't written completely in assembly language. The stuff that had to be fast was in assembly, but to fit more stuff in, we used a lot of AppleSoft for the things that didn't have to be fast, a lot of the user interface stuff, because AppleSoft is all tokenized. So like a print statement is one byte token. There's a lot of stuff in AppleSoft, just by using a single byte token, you can replace what it would be, 20, 30 bytes of machine language code. So that was one of the tricks we used for fitting a lot of stuff in there. This also came up around the time we released Graphics Magician. Complete Graphics System and Special Effects were initially copy protected, and actually pretty much everything at that time was copy protected, which kind of went against the grain of everything I learned, which is backup, 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 anything important. So when it came time to release Graphics Magician, I made the decision, ill-advised, said L. Tomervik, to release it without copy protection. And I wrote a letter that most of the magazines published about, hey, we're going to release our software, our application software, unprotected. It's for your benefit, so you can make copies if you're working with the stuff. You know, if the disk crashes, you don't have to wait a week to send it back and for us to replace it, stuff like that. You know, make your own backups. Just don't rip us off, please. And you know, those 3 programs were doing really well. Or those 2 programs, and Al Tomarovic at Softalk, his advice was, don't do it. You're going to put yourself right out of business right away. You know, they published our letter in this and in Softline, and the other magazines, Nibble published it, and it worked. We actually wound up selling more software. It was cool going to all the computer shows, and people would just nonstop come up, oh, thank you for not protecting your stuff. You know, we'll never pirate anything of Penguin's. You know, and you know, it just went over well, and instead of going down, our sales increased. So it wound up being a pretty cool thing. But yeah, it was definitely going out on the limb, and we were pretty much the first ones to do that. I think, yes. Then we ran a contest. We kept it going. Softalk ran a anything but smoky contest. Okay, I missed the one thing. There, in our documentation, Cheryl, my wife, was forced to do all these little penguin illustrations. You know, Spies Demise, they're wearing spy outfits, and Pie Man, they're wearing chef's hats and all that. Like, oh, what now? Feather bombs, they have to wear spacesuits. But this thing about taking the protection off, someone came up with the idea in the documentation of saying, only you can prevent software piracy. And then, you know, somebody else, and I can't remember who came, you know, Cheryl, can you draw a penguin that looks like Smokey the Bear? So we had this little illustration of a penguin looking like Smokey the Bear, saying only you can prevent software piracy. And then somebody in our company decided we needed to name the penguin, and what a great idea to run a contest in Softalk. So we had an anything but Smokey contest in Softalk magazine, and this was late '82, I think, and by early '83, somebody won, named it Preston. So we had Preston Penguin, and I saw some Preston Penguin buttons around. There's one here. This is my last remaining Preston button. Preston Penguin says, only you can prevent software piracy. We couldn't figure out who did that illustration, though. But yeah, here's, zoom in, the contest winners. Let's see, anybody enter this? Anyone here? No, okay. Yeah, the winner was Preston Penguin, because it evokes the mental image of Sergeant Preston of the Yukon, although not his faithful sled dog King, another cold weather fighter of crime and corruption. And then we also printed some of the other goofy ones in the magazine there. Another one was Protecto the Penguin, but the best sound effects. Protecto the Penguin, his letter ended with, P.S. Remember, Protecto the Penguin says, Funk, Funk. That wound up being a common saying around our office, Funk, Funk. And it's thanks to John Schaller, apparently. Yeah, there's Preston in his glory. That was in one of the Insider magazine, did an article about software piracy. Oh, and there's some guy in his, that's Jesse. You might recognize the guy on the left. That's Waz and his son Jesse, and Jesse's wearing a Preston the Penguin t-shirt. So it was kind of, he showed up at one of the West Coast fairs, something like that, and bought all our stuff and some t-shirts, and then sent me a Polaroid. That was fun. Well, around the same time, Softalk magazine asked me to write a column about graphics. So started writing a monthly column called Graphically Speaking, and basically wrote down, my column was basically a tutorial on how to do everything we had done in Complete Graphic System and Graphics Magician. If you read through Graphically Speaking in the columns, it's got a lot of our code in there. It was, we didn't try to hide it all, like, oh, this is trade secrets. There were companies that were doing that, like, oh, no, this is our secret, formula, and we're not telling anybody how it's done. Basically, in that column, I wrote about all the little tricks we had used, and yeah, that's the book just republished is through Brian here, and Call Apple is Graphically Speaking, and you can go down to his room and get copies, and I'll be around today and tomorrow morning. If you want any signatures, I can do that too.
I've got them with me.
He's got them here. Yep. Oh, what have I done? Okay. How am I doing on time? Where are we?
2:45.
2:45.
You have 45 minutes.
Okay, that's good. So, started going around the trade shows and running into people who were writing stuff with Graphics Magician, and that's how we wound up doing computer games. Actually, Pie Man was the first one, I think. A guy named Eagle Burns, who was an IT guy at Stanford, and a friend of his, Mike Saka, wrote a game using Graphics Magician for all the animation, called Pie Man. It was like the old I Love Lucy sketch with the conveyor belt and running around, and so you had to control this pie and run around and put whipped cream and cherry on the pie before they fell off the conveyor belt and stuff like that, and then grab the pie and put it in the bin. It was cute. Eagle was an interesting character. He was really into the concept of nonviolent games, which I liked. I've never been a fan of the shoot 'em ups and stuff like that. So he was really into promoting that, and it was an example of that. A guy named Antonio Antiochia, who was a 16-year-old high school kid at the time, sent in a text adventure called Transylvania. It was programmed in BASIC. And this was while we were working on Graphics Magician. And it was actually a clever little adventure game. We said, hey, we got this thing we're working on called Graphics Magician. So I sent him an early copy of it. And he came up with these awesome graphics to go along with the game. And, we polished it up and added the graphics in and put out, first adventure game, Transylvania, or our first adventure game, which I think holds up pretty well. I think it's one of the better adventure games out there. As far as adventure games, I kind of like the ones that it's not straight line, you have to get past this puzzle, get here, to get here. I like it, the adventure games where, okay, here's the premise, now you can do this or this or this or this, and you kind of solve all these puzzles. They eventually come together, but you're not stuck having to solve one thing. You can think about that one a little while you're solving that other one too. So the adventures we mostly did were kind of along that line. And the idea behind putting these out was, here's some stuff you can do with Graphics Magician. So that's actually how we got into publishing games. I hadn't really intended to be a game publisher, but it was like, hey, here's some examples of the type of stuff you can do. Here's some good ones. Somebody had their hand up, or no? Okay. And then Alan Zeldin came up with the Spies Demise game, which we rejiggered to be, it was different graphics and all that. We changed the premise and stuff. Eagle worked at Apple, and then he worked on, not the original Macintosh, but the second,
GS too, I think.
Yeah, and then GS. So he worked there for a while, and then after that he worked at Oracle. When Oracle was kind of down, here he came in and came in on the upswing of Oracle. So he did really well with both Apple and Oracle. And actually, prior to Apple, he wrote Micro Focus COBOL, wrote the COBOL that ran out of the Apple. So, yeah, that was all his work.
What's up with the werewolf?
What's up with the werewolf?
How do you get past the werewolf?
How do you get past there are silver bullets in the coffin. You have to pry open the coffin to get the silver bullets to the flintlock.
Okay, that'll do.
That's one I did. A lot of them I don't remember. Like 30 years ago. Well, that's what I was going to tell the copy protection story. When we did Copy Protect Complete Graphics System, originally, the first versions of Complete Graphics System and special effects were copy protected. I really didn't like playing that game, so I just went simple and devious with that. The copy protection on the original version of Complete Graphics System, basically there wasn't. There was just a little boot up thing that, the disks we got for duplicating were notchless, so people couldn't accidentally write on them, right? And we would neuter our drives, as we called it. You go open it up, clip the wire that, it's got the little sensor. So we would use neuter drives for our duplication, so we can copy our things on these notchless disks. The first thing in the code, when it boots up, is it tries to write something to disk. If it fails, we assume you're using our notchless disk, and we say everything's cool, and goes on. If it successfully writes something to the disk, we assume that you've copied it onto a notched disk, and thus we say, that's not our original. So, people would copy it with locksmith and this and that, and like, oh man, how do you get this to work? Put a little rate protect tab on it. So, but then we got, then we took it all off, so that was our trick. Well, this is a fun one. You remember that thing about the future, the Softalk magazine? And this is the back of one of the Spy Strikes Back. You went the narrative, Miss Money Penguin. The villain was Dr. X, and so the name of the top of the folder is Dr. Xavier Torsion. Yeah, extortion, right? Flash forward, and you guys follow this thing about Marina Butina, the Russian spy recently that had compromised somebody in the government, and then was, funneling money into the NRA and stuff like this. It was just in the last 6 months or so, right? Marina Butina. This is from an article, and she admitted to working with Alexander Torsion. I read that like, whoa, that's pretty close. This is just a picture of all the stuff we published over the years. So, yeah, we wound up publishing a lot of games. I actually worked more into the application stuff. We had some other people working for the company that were really into the games. In the game area, I liked the adventures, stuff like that. Dave worked with most of the game authors. And if you have questions about any of the specific games or any of the authors we worked with, write them down. I'll answer them later on. But yeah, we did a whole series of games. Some of them did okay. Transylvania and Spies Demise sold quite a bit. The Quest did pretty well. The Comprehend Adventures did pretty well. If you've never played it, this is actually the one that didn't sell a lot. That is actually pretty cool. Probably one of our best game, called Sword of Kadash. That was written by Dynamics, Jeff Tunnell and Chris Cole, and that was pretty good. We published that right toward the end, and didn't sell a lot, but it was actually one of the better ones. Let's see. What other pictures I can zip past here? Here's some of our staff and our our office with the pool. We started out in our apartment. We eventually bought a fairly small house. Once we got around 5 or 6 employees, we outgrew that. We wound up buying a place in the Geneva Business District. It was a cinder block house. The problem was it was not really easy to air condition because of the way it was built. So in the summers, we would just show up in our swimsuits and get warm, hop in the pool, come back, try not to drip in the keyboard. Somebody was asking about Dr. Cat. Dave Shapiro worked for us for a while. And it was all pretty lighthearted there. We didn't take ourselves too seriously. It was like, let's have fun with this. We're on a roll. Let's enjoy it. And we had to print our own disc sleeves, and suddenly went, bing, wait a minute, we're printing our own disc sleeves. You can print front and back. Here's the normal stuff you have in the back of the disc. Like, oh, we can do our own. So we had Dave Holly do a whole bunch. Dave Holly's the guy that wrote Zoom Graphics and Sherwood Forest. He lived nearby. He also did our copy protection for the games. So he did a bunch of little illustrations, and so we had silly stuff like that going on. Later on, when we had a Coveted Polarware, we had another variation of that. We also had some fun with the ads. To save money, eventually we had 2-page spreads in Softalk and some of the magazines. To save a little bit of money, we'd do black and white on one side and color on the other side because it was like twice as expensive to run a color ad. So we did kind of like a newsletter thing, and we always did author profiles. And I think it was on the other page. Little author profiles, little asterisk, and at the asterisk, profile is the trademark of Apple Computer. Oh yeah, Steve came. So we need some frivolous shorts in here, and our graphic arts guy did frivolous shorts. Okay. Like, okay, I'll go with it. Sure. We're trying to sell software, and that works. And then also, something that snuck in there was in the fine print. Anybody notice the fine print at the back of our packages? The Apple's a trademark of blah, 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 blah. We started, I don't know how this started. It was, somebody there did, maybe it was me. But then it got passed around. The little fine print, Penguin Software Inc., copyright, Apple's trademark of Apple Computer, Atari is a trademark of Atari Inc., Penguin's Sun Argyle socks. And we started putting it little, at the end of the fine print, in every package we had a little saying that somebody in the company made up. Here I can zoom in on some of these. Crime wave, penguins delight in fresh herring. Penguins have frivolous tendencies, yep, okay. Oh, there's the penguins dressed up for bouncing kamungas as farmers or something. Penguins frown on aerobic dance. Stellar 7, Space 1, penguins have yet to defy gravity. I think Brian and I counted 37 of them that we found. I didn't put them all up there, and I'm not going to. There's at least 37 out there. Oh yeah, Todd Porter, one of our early employees. This is actually from, there's the penguins dressed up as spies for the spies' demise. One of our early employees was Todd Porter, who was just out of high school. He was working at a computer store nearby, and he came in and was doing tech support, phone support and stuff like that, just as a 17-year-old or whatever it was. He worked for us for a couple of years, then wound up going down to Texas someone offered him a bunch of money to develop some software for his business, and he hadn't gone to college. I said, Todd, you gotta go to college and get a computer science degree. About 15 years later or so, John Romero had a Apple II reunion party, the 20 years, like 98 or something like that, 97, down in Dallas. And I went to it and walk in there, and one of the people that comes up to me is Todd Porter. Like, 15 years later, and Todd, what are you doing here? Like, oh, I'm CEO of IronStorm. Like, what? How'd that? I kind of lost touch with him after he went down there and was doing some business software for somebody. He did go on through college and that, and he did wound up publishing a bunch of stuff. So, but it was kind of freaky to run into him. Yeah, John Romero. I was teaching college, and just once out of the blue, I got this email. You, like, and this guy was writing about how he learned programming using Graphics Magician. That was, and from Graphically Speaking, and so he signed it, and something about id Software. I'm like, id Software. That sounds familiar. I look it up. Oh, Doom. Oh, John Romero. He wrote this. Oh. So apparently the guy who wrote, John Romero, who wrote Doom and all that other stuff, Castle Wolfenstein, he says he learned his programming from Graphics Magician, which actually was double cool a year or two later. I mentioned this in class. I was teaching programming class. One of my students, Chris Avila, was like, he mentioned John Romero's name. And apparently John Romero was his big programming hero. And he had actually corresponded with John. So he goes back home that night and writes an email to John. Like, my computer science teacher mentioned your name, said that you guys know each other. And John wrote this glowing letter back to him about, how, I was basically his hero from, from the Apple days. So the next day my student comes in and is like, wait a minute. So that was pretty cool. Plus, John sent me this giant Doom poster at the college. I mean, it was like this, with this like evil, like, here, hang this up at the college. I wound up giving it to Chris. He was happy with it. Oh, Spy's Demise. There was also, it was mentioned that there was a puzzle in Spy's Demise, and the first person to win it would, get a free T-shirt and that. I figured somebody's going to hack into this thing and find the ASCII clues to the things. You have to, I don't know, each time you solve a level or something like that, you would get part of the clue, and you have to go through like 7 or 8 levels to get the full thing. So in the ASCII text, in the actual game, there's a 9th line, an extra line. So if somebody hacked into it, they would solve this, and you get a phone number to call, and then who you're supposed to ask for, and then the extra line is who you're supposed to say you are. So basically, if anybody called in and asked for whoever, and then if well, who is this? If they we knew they had hacked it because that line never actually showed up in the game. So, like, oh, God, how are you prevent against somebody hacking into this and to win the prizes, which were valuable T-shirts? I don't know. Computer shows. Kind of skipped over that. That's artist Bill Geezy, that's that guy I mentioned earlier, doing our backdrop for our computer shows. There it is, full size. That's the only picture I've got of it. We were setting up for a show. But I showed you the photo of Boston Applefest. There were Applefests all over the place. Houston, New York, Anaheim, Minneapolis, West Coast Computer Fair, of course. We traveled to all these things. Every other month we were somewhere or another. And it was a great place to meet the people who are using the software and all that. We got a lot of program submissions and stuff. But it also was this gathering spot for all of us in the computer industry. Softalk was there, always there. Ellen, Margot, Ken Williams and his brother John were there all the time. Doug and Gary Carlston and Scott Adams, and all these guys were there all the time. And so we would get together, every month or two in some other city, and the show would go on on Friday, and after the show Friday evening when it closed, we'd all go out to dinner. Try that. Get a group of 30 people wandering around a strange city trying to find a restaurant on a Friday night that'll take a group of 30. So we usually involved just wandering around from place to place until there was enough attrition from the group that we'd find somewhere to sit down. But this is, where we all got together and traded notes. And in the early days, it was a lot of fun because we did share stuff. There were very few secrets that we withheld from each other. I remember one time being kind of really taken aback. This one pretty cool arcade type program with some like a 3D maze. It was really neat, and like, oh, how'd they do that? And I ran into the programmer of the show, and how'd you manage that? And like, oh no, that's a trade secret. Like, yeah, that was so unusual at the time. We generally, oh, how'd you do that? Oh, this. We traded that information. It was, we all pretty much worked together. I mean, we had competing products here and there, but there was plenty of room at that time. So that was a lot of fun doing these shows. Where we are? Oh yeah, Richard and Robert Gary were among that group. Roger Wagner, Mark Blank, the guys from Infocom, Mike Berlin, Margot. Woz. Yeah. Remember in Boston once. Two things. One, our first employee, Trish, she had sprained her ankle, so she was in a wheelchair. She still wanted to go to the show, so we brought her in a wheelchair. And so in the wandering around Boston evening, Woz was wheeling Trish around. So from then on, she was wheeled by Woz, Trish. And then I think that same evening, as I had a rental car, so we were actually going somewhere as a group by rental car, I think for ice cream or something. And I'm pulling away from the curb, I hear a thump, and behind me I see Woz laying on the street. Fortunately, I had looked in the rearview mirror, I saw him, do the run into the car and flop, to make me out. Like, yeah, ran over Woz. Oh well. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is kind of interesting. This is from Complete Graphics System. This goes back, to when I first released stuff. I had this feature that I mentioned about that I got adapted for the paintbrushes, but it was a thing where you could put text anywhere on the screen, not just in designated columns and stuff like some of the other stuff at the time. But the reason I'm showing you this is the font. It's really ugly. I wrote this thing to do the text. I needed some text. Okay, I have to make letters. So, I have no background in doing fonts on that. So these were my versions of letters that came out with the original Complete Graphics System. Fortunately, a few months later, I was able to work with Call Apple to, they had a compilation of actual good fonts, and said, hey, can I reformat these so they'll work my thing and resell them? And so we got some good fonts with it. But this is the original font with Complete Graphics System. We were doing the Applefest in New Orleans. It was at the Superdome. And at one point, I look up at the big screen on the Superdome there, where they're running stuff. I'm like, oh my God, they're using my font in the Superdome. Like, why? It was unmistakably this ugly thing. There's that's on the way to. That's the Apple IIc launch. 1984 was pretty good. We were actually at the Mac launch. A guy named Bob Hardy's in the next slide. he adapted Transylvania for the Macintosh, and so we were there at the launch. They gave us a booth and all that. And we were actually one of the first companies to actually have things for sale when the Mac launched. So that was really good several months because people could buy a Mac and there's like, 3 choices of what to buy. So we sold a lot of copies of Transylvania that year. Put Antonia through college. And then a few months later, they introduced the Apple IIc. So this is Stephen Marshall Muse with me on the way to the Apple IIc launch at Moscone Center. And I'm wearing my Preston Penguin shirt, I guess. And actually, that dates one thing that on the flight on the way over, Marsha and I designed a game that we produced a couple of years later on that flight. And there's Bob Hardy. He's the guy that did the Mac stuff. So the Apple IIc launch was in the Moscone Center. I don't know if you heard this story. At the launch, we're standing there, and this is the ground floor of the Moscone Center, and at one point, it's like somebody really large is walking behind you on a wooden floor, and like, wait a minute, we're not on a wooden floor. There's concrete. Look up, and the big sheet glass windows are going. Whoo, whoo, whoo. They had like a around a 5.9 or 6.0 earthquake right that day. It was right during the IIc event. And then also in '84 was the Hackers Conference. Stuart Brand from the Whole Earth Catalog sponsored this thing and basically got together all these people who were involved in launching the personal computer industry. And this was really cool. I mean, Woz was there and all the Mac guys, but also the guys that I had been reading back in the mid-'70s, Lee Felsenstein and Bob Albrecht, and those guys were there. John Draper, Captain Crunch. He was there. So I got to meet all these people that were involved in starting this. And I wish I had a pretty good contingent there. Dave Lubar was there. Chris Jacobson was Broderman, but he was there. And that's actually Bob Hardy, although they misidentified him in the caption. And I think he's showing off Transylvania or something on Mac, or something else he had done. Ray Ozzie, Robert Frankston. Okay. There's other things at the shows. I think it was the West Coast Fair. I was sitting in the back of the booth during a radio interview. And Bob Hardy was up at front, and I'm doing the radio interview, and after the radio interview, I said, Bob, there's a guy over there that looked like Mork. And, looked like him. Bob said, yeah, it was him. He came to the booth, and he said, are you Penguin Software? And Bob got his autograph and everything. I was doing a radio interview. Didn't get to meet him. So. Also, excuse me, around that time, was getting calls from this guy at Harvard who was, can Mark come out sometime and visit us at Harvard Lampoon or whatever it was, and he was just constantly calling. I mean, it was like, I won't say that name, but somebody would come in, so-and-so's on the phone again, and like, okay, it's the next time I'm out in the New York area, whatever, I'll go to Boston. So I went to visit them at Harvard Lampoon, and they had written some software with the graphics magician, kind of spoofing the basketball, the Dr. J, Larry Bird thing with ballerinas and stuff like that. And all kinds of weird stuff, spoofing different products. The guy had a very distinguishing name, and it wasn't until maybe 10 years later that I ran across the name again. I was reading Newsweek or something like that, and Letterman had just moved on, and some guy named Conan O'Brien was taking over. This was Conan O'Brien who Conan's on the phone again. It was Conan O'Brien that kept trying to get us. And the thing is, I got there and like, yeah, this would be kind of cool. We might do something with that. He says, yeah, we're going to publish it with electronic arts. Like, well, you did it with graphic magician, won't you? And I don't think it ever got out there. And also, we're working with the Muppet folks. They published a bunch of stuff using Graphics Magician. So when I was out in New York, I think same trip, I got the grand tour of the Muppet Brownstone where they're building all the Muppets. And Chris Cerf is Bennett Cerf's son. Chris wrote a lot of the music and stuff for the Muppets and was one of the main writers. And got to tour the whole studios. That was kind of cool. Go up in the conference room. They've got the dark crystal chairs and everything. And oh yeah. Neil Shapiro was one of the writers for Popular Mechanics, of all things. They wrote a lot about computers back then, Popular Mechanics, Popular Electronics. And once at the West Coast Fair, he said, hey, you know, we corresponded quite a bit over the years. He said, there's this guy, Billy wants to treat you to lunch. You know, can you join us for lunch? You know, one day. So we go up to lunch, and Billy was Billy Hearst, otherwise known as William Randolph Hearst III. That was interesting. It was before he took over the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle. But and I didn't have the wherewithal to say, "Hey, do you have any money? Do you want to invest in a software company?" I should have done that. Yeah, that kind of takes us, okay, to Polarware. Excuse me, not coughing into the microphone. Yeah, so 85, things started going weird. Softalk had gone out of business, late 84, mid 84, something like that. Al actually came and worked at Penguin Software for a while. And then I got this letter from a book publisher, a little company you may have heard of called Penguin Books, which, and they said, please don't use our name. Like, no, they didn't say it like that. They said, cease and desist. And talked to, we got some lawyers, you know, from, you know, some good trademark lawyers in Chicago who said, yeah, you know, you have a pretty good case. You could probably win this. But do you realize that Penguin Viking Crown is the largest book publisher in the world? You know, you can win this, but you will spend all your money doing so. You know, that's the way it works. You know, basically they said, you know, we can make this, we can drag this out for a couple of years for you. But if you want to win it, it's going to cost you more money than you have. They've got unlimited pockets to just keep at you. So this was pretty discouraging because we'd spent all this time really establishing Penguin Software as a brand, and you know, really kind of focusing on that. And you know, here's the things we publish, and we had to change our name. So we changed it to Polarware over time. You know, boxes, you know, had Polarware from Penguin Software, and eventually Penguin Software phased out. And you know, getting around 86, it was kind of 85, 86. It was kind of funky for other reasons. Macintosh had come out. Commodore Amiga and Atari ST had come out. IBM PC was going crazy, dominating the market, and their graphics sucked. You know, you had CGA graphics or EGA. I don't like the PC. In retrospect, I guess I should have learned to like it. Apple came out with the GS about a year after the Amiga and ST. And they were very clear to us at that point. And Jobs was gone now from Apple. Scully had taken over. And Apple had kind of changed as far as a company to work with at that point. But they made it clear to us that this is the end of the line for the Apple II. You know, our future is Macintosh. And so we had all these different formats. And, you know, which way do we go? You know, you can see the, you know, market shares for the ST, tiny sliver, you know, the Amiga, you know, tiny sliver, and made, you know, the Apple, they kind of combined all the Apple IIs together in there, but, you know, it's decreasing. If you look at the Apple II sales, you know, through here, you can see the definite trend. So, you know, we had the issue of, like, well, where do we go with this? You know, where do we put our development time and stuff into? And kind of decided that what we really need to do right now was to do cross-development systems, develop something that we can release on 5 or 6 systems at a time, and as easily as possible. So, and just kind of bide our time with the graphics until something emerged, because, you know, Macintosh didn't have color graphics, you know. So we put a lot of effort into, I'm going to go to another page here. The adventure series, we wrote our own adventure language called Comprehend, with the full sentence parser, and it was actually our own language. We wrote a language, how to write it, and then we had a compiler that would compile it into an interpreted runtime code when we had put interpreters on each of the different systems. So we could basically take this compiled version of what the adventure should be and port that interpreted file over to all different systems and release it across systems. It would work the same. And we already had the thing with graphics. Graphics Magician with the vector graphics, that was by nature portable. All we had to do was write the Graphics Magician drawing routine so it worked similarly on machines. We had to adjust some colors here and there, but we were able to take the graphics and put them on different machines. So we started releasing adventures using this Comprehend system, and those did pretty well. We released the second version of Transylvania, Antonio's sequel, Crimson Crown. We redid a Mike Berlin text adventure that he had done earlier called Utopos. And then we really released Transylvania and Coveted Mirror. Also, around the same time, we were developing our first educational series. And I mentioned that picture with Stephen Marshall Muse. The thing that we had designed on that trip to San Francisco, they came from Boston, and we connected and wound up flying together from Boston to San Francisco, was this Spies Adventure series. It was a world geography series. As a kid, I loved Risk and you know, Game of the States and things like that, where a game, but you actually learned geography, and wanted to create something like that. And so, you know, we had this thing at, I don't remember the timing here. I guess early '85 or late '84, I had it out for testing. We were actually testing it through a couple of universities to see if it was educationally sound, if this actually did. I might have their years flipped. Anyway, make sure that, you know, not only, you know, kids like playing it, did they learn stuff? You know, that was the important part. So basically, we're, you know, we were redoing some of the graphics. We redid the Magic Paintbrush thing with mouse input, more like a Macintosh thing. We were working on these Comprehend adventures. We're doing the Spy series. And things kind of went south around then, late '85, early '86. Things like King's Quest came out. The text adventures started dropping off in sales. The joystick-driven ones were getting more popular. Distributors, instead of selling software into the little mom-and-pop stores that would trade printers and RAM for, you know, cotton packages and stuff like that in the early days, now we're selling to Toys R Us and Sears and Barnes and Noble and Borders. That's another reason that Penguin Books wasn't happy with us. Plus we called probably not a good idea to call those interactive novels. I did not do myself any favors with that. It was getting kind of weird, and then a couple of distributors went out of business, owing us tons of money. Like, you know, they owed us, you know, $40,000, and ooh, we're bankrupt. Ooh, and Toys R Us bought a huge amount of some game. I don't remember what it was. That, you know, it was like $30,000 or $40,000 worth of this game to put in all their stores, and you know, big companies like that, you know, they're on net 90. You know, you ship it, and 90 days later they send you a check. Well, it got close to 90 days, and they say, you know, that didn't sell as well as we wanted it to. We're going to just give you like 25% of this invoice. Like, it might have been a different number, but it was something like that. It was a small amount of what they owed us, and like, well, okay, you send the other ones back? No, we don't do that. They'll just, you know, put them on the discount rack. Like, we paid for all this stuff, you know, the materials and all this. Plus, I've already paid the authors their royalties. Yeah, so we had stuff like that going on. And so, yeah, we wound up having to downsize a bit. I'm not going to get into the story right now about the spy adventures, but that was another thing that changed in the industry. So, anyway, so I by the end of '86, I was kind of ready to get out. It was not fun anymore. I had actually learned how to play steel drums. That was just as a hobby. But I started, and at these trade shows, the MIDI standard had just come out. And I met one of the guys that designed the MIDI standard and all that. And so I started fooling around with that. And I was actually having a lot more fun doing music stuff that would never sell with Penguin Software. I mean, it's a market that is this big versus, you know, potential market this way, Penguin Software. So I got kind of interested in doing that stuff. End of '86, I decided I was going to get out. And I told the people who were working for us that, you know, hey, I'm going to wind it down over this next year. You know, just let it sell through what we got. A group of 4 of them said, hey, we want to keep it going. I said, okay. So I sold it to them for a small amount of money. And they didn't pay me the whole amount of money. So, you know, they kept it going for a couple more years, and they wound up selling it to Merit Software, and the Merit Software did some funky accounting where they threw it into bankruptcy, but they took the assets that were good, and I called them on that. But anyway, I wound up buying the rights back to the stuff that we had published for old time's sake. So, how are we doing on time?
Oh, just about 3:30.
It's about 3:30. Okay. You want to do questions? I can talk about stuff I've been doing since then. Do you want to take a break? What do you guys want to do?
Well, we have a start announcements at 3:45-ish. So.
Okay. Oh, I'm just going to zip real fast through some stuff. I played steel drums, and got Apple II MIDI interface. The Apple IIc had a MIDI interface you can get to with it, and I wrote some software that when we were working up arrangements here. I told you I put some music on. I'm going to put some music on. Here, put that on quietly. That's the 3 of us playing. It's just 3 of us playing with an Apple IIc playing the percussion and bass stuff. And as we were working out arrangements, basically instead of boring a drummer and bass player to death, you know, as we're working out notes and all that stuff, I programmed the IIc to play just, you know, the percussion and the bass parts to go along with the songs. And we wound up playing out live with the Apple IIc behind us. And I sold the software as MIDI on stage, just, you know, almost back to photocopied manuals type thing. But this is '86. And I think the probably first ever to do that, running running MIDI as a background. I had a little foot switch where you could, do loops, go through solo parts, or have run an extended solo and want to kick out, so hit the foot switch and go on and stuff like that. And I had actually sold a bunch of copies of MIDI on stage until Apple came out with the Rev B motherboard for the Apple IIc, which was no longer compatible with MIDI. So that was the end of that one. Anyway, start playing steel drums. These steel drums are actually right here. Those was my first set of steel drums, and the guy who bought them, you might recognize his name, Roger Wagner. He still has them. I talked to him a couple months ago, and I still got the steel drums. Also, some other stuff. Okay, Utopos. That was Mike Berlin wrote this. He had written some early stuff with Sentient Software out in Colorado. Some animation stuff with graphics magicians. That's how I got to know him. When we did the Comprehensive Adventures, I said, "Hey, do you mind if we take that old Utopos text adventure and adapt it?" Anyway, as it happened, another airplane flight. This time we were going out to Las Vegas to CES, and Mike was working at Infocom at the time, and he had a connection in Chicago, and it turned out we're on the same plane, so we arranged to sit next to each other on the way from Chicago to Las Vegas. And as we're flying over the Rockies, he was talking about how he used to work in Aspen, and this musician I knew of, Jimmy Buffett, lived in Aspen for a while. And actually, I'd seen Buffett at U of I when I was there. It was 99 cents and a penny for your date at the student union. We're talking, and Mike says, well, he used to work in a computer store in Aspen. He sold Buffett's sister an Apple II computer. I'm going, really? Buffett has an Apple II computer? He might know who we are. And Mike said that, he lived in Red Mountain subdivision or something in Aspen. So when we got back, I wrote a letter to Jimmy Buffett. Address to Jimmy Buffett, Red Mountain subdivision, Aspen, Colorado. And say, hey, it comes to my attention, you might have an Apple II, and here's who we are, and that. Would you be interested in doing a Margaritaville adventure game? And sent it off, and nothing happened. It didn't come back, though. That told me something. Okay, post office usually turns things if it's misaddressed. 4 or 5 months later, I get a phone call. Somebody comes in and says, "Hey, there's a guy on the phone says it's Jimmy Buffett." And so we were going to do a Margaritaville adventure game. He was going to do a Margaritaville movie. He was working with Mike Nesmith. Anyway, that started a long relationship with Jimmy Buffett. I got to visit him at, backstage at all the shows and stuff like that. And anyway, after when I wrote him letters, hey, it was all contingent on that movie getting done. That movie never got done, so it was kind of on his side. But he knew that I was doing MIDI stuff, so he calls up about a year later. It was '87 or so, and says. There's this, actually his assistant called and says there's this guy, Russ Kunkel, is going to give you a call about setting a Macintosh in the studio. And Russ Kunkel, now any of you know music from the 70s, if you look at the back here, I read albums all the time. And this is kind of taken off of Russ's webpage. This is like Russ Kunkel. He's worked with Jackson Browne, Jimmy Buffett, Harry Chapin, Tracy Chapman, Arlo Guthrie, B.B. King, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Art Garfunkel, Dan Fogelberg, Joni Mitchell, Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, Linda Ronstadt, James Taylor, the Eagles. Basically, when I heard the name Russ Kunkel, I thought, oh my God, he's in the back of almost all my albums. And so they wanted me to set up a Macintosh to do MIDI in Jimmy Buffett's brand new recording studio at Shrimp Sound. So I wound up going down there. I flew down with a Macintosh, transferred planes in Miami. They put me in a DC-3 to fly down to Key West. That was fun. And this is before Margaritaville became the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. This is what they picked me up in. And we went over to Jimmy's house, and I stayed at his house for a week or so and set up the studio. This is Russ Conco, drummer, and Jimmy, and I'm behind the camera. Mike Utley. It was actually 4 of us in the studio for about a week, recording and picking up a guitar and jamming with the group. It was kind of fun. So I worked on a couple of albums with Jimmy Buffett, and also wound up through that working with Dan Fogelberg, setting up his studio. This is all setting up MIDI stuff to interface into their tape systems and all that. So that was kind of fun. Other stuff I did, okay, I went back into teaching around 1990, 91, started teaching college. But along the fact, I had summers off, so I wrote an early travel guide type thing, really kind of an early thing, kind of like Google Maps. You zoom in on an area, it shows you, what attractions and restaurants and stuff are around there. Early CD-ROM before the internet. Started one of the first online classes. Was taught Visual Basic in 1996. Before there was any software for doing this, I set up the course using my office mate's old Pentium 90, their old Pentium 90 that it was being replaced for something better. I thought, well, I don't need the screen and all that, I just need to talk to the internet. So I wrote a bunch of software to do online classes, stuff for doing conferencing and stuff like that, and shared it with the community, and a whole bunch of universities around the world were using it for a couple of years until some larger companies came through and came up with fully integrated systems. In 1999, one of my former students, she had a couple toddlers at home, and she had finished our program, and like, what can I do? I got to work out at home. Taking care of my kids. I can't go out for a job right now. You have any ideas? Something I can do at home? So together we put together a website called reallybigmall.com. This is right when online shopping started up, and it was basically an aggregation of all these online retailers, where you can actually search for different types of products and find stores that sold stuff, and it actually turned out to be a decent revenue model with it, where we got commissions from anybody we sent to the various stores. She did all the data work for that. I did some of the design stuff. But we launched it in January '99, I think. Like March or beginning of April. I'm watching the stats for traffic, and it's going, and then this one Monday, it's like the traffic's going crazy. Like, what the heck is going on? And I had no clue. And why are we getting this huge bump in traffic? So finally, I got a couple emails like, where did you hear about us? How did you find us? How are these people finding us? Well, apparently, it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal had done an article about online shopping, and they're talking about Mall of America, and this is the front page, and so they're talking about should the developer of Mall of America be concerned with like internet upstarts reallybigmall.com, instead of like, how did Wall Street Journal get this? And like, wait a minute. Mall of America. I did this joke page. There was, so on the home page for Really Big Mall, there was a little page comparing Really Big Mall to Mall of America. It was this. It was just like compare, Mall of America, over 500 stores. We had over 1,800. They have lots of stuff. We have more than 10 times as much. They've got 4.2 million square feet. We've got about 50 square feet. 20,000 parking spots. We can't compete with that, but your parking spot here is more likely more convenient. Lots of restrooms. Yeah, but one closer is probably closer to here and cleaner. A roller coaster. Okay, got us there. Mall food at mall prices. Check the fridge and compare. And they have Camp Snoopy. We don't have a mascot yet, but how about Rocky Rockhopper? And I put a penguin from Penguin Software into a tropical shirt from, Anyway, I'm like, wait a minute. So I get on, I don't know if it was Google at the time or Alta Vista or whatever. I get on search engine, like, do a search on Mall of America. And first page. There's the joke page that got Wall Street Journal to us. And actually, then, after Wall Street Journal published a whole bunch of the big magazines, Young and Modern, YM and stuff like that. CNN had us on Black Friday. They had a little segment, a noon Black Friday on online shopping, and it had a, little 10-minute demo of a really big mall. So that was pretty cool. I turned it over to Karen, and she's done okay. It didn't make tons of money, but it made enough for her to make a decent living. So she's been running that. And actually, I wound up playing steel drums in a band, and wound up playing with Jimmy Buffett several times. Later on in the 2000s, he was opening Cheeseburger in Paradise restaurants, and he called and said, "Hey, I know you play steel drums. Can you guys play with us?" And we played with him at one, and then he had us flew us around the country to play a bunch of other gigs. You want to scoop me off here yet, or?
Not yet.
Okay, I'm almost done, I think. Yes, almost done. So 2012, I was pretty much finishing up teaching. I was teaching online courses a lot, and living downtown Chicago for most of the time. We were getting ready to sell our house, and we had an apartment in Chicago that we were moving into. And I got an email from the Obama campaign headquarters. They're looking for interns. So, since I was teaching college, I wanted to know if any of my students were interested in doing internships. And I said, well, what kind of stuff do you need? And they described some of the stuff they were trying to do. I'm like, oh man, so this is over their heads. But I'm teaching online. I don't need to be at the college all the time. I'm a few blocks away from here. I'm living right downtown. And I said, I might be able to help you out. And I'd been a political junkie all these years. Just reading. I had subscriptions to Time and Newsweek. And I'd reading everything. So I thought, watch the War Room movie with the Clinton guys and all that stuff, and just fascinated by this kind of stuff. I'm like, how cool it would be to be a fly on the wall at a campaign headquarters, And so it was at the Prudential building where they had the campaign headquarters. That's a picture of it now. This is, just for fun, I had a picture of, this is in 1964, when I was a kid. It was the tallest building in Chicago, and I remember going up there, to the observation deck. The air pollution was a little worse then, too. So yeah, this is the inside of Obama campaign headquarters. And they actually kind of set me up with this little, I wasn't part of the regular IT staff. They had their big projects, and they were doing the web pages and all that. I was kind of this little rogue development thing, that stuff that we needed internally done. Stuff just to make things efficient on the inside. And I wound up working with just about every department in the campaign throughout there. Stuff that I would occasionally go home with my jaw dragging on the ground, like, okay, I'm doing research for the debate, stuff that he's going to be using in the debate? No. Or stuff with the conventions. It was really cool, working with big data, and I had a bunch of interns working with me and stuff. And I was even on TV. They didn't interview me. This was actually a long shot. They were probably across the room, and I think I was talking with this guy about where to go from lunch. They were probably like zooming in, like making it look close. I had no idea until I watched the show. Like, wait a minute. Oh yes, and one day I'm coming into the office, come off the elevator and around into the main room, and as I turn the corner, I come face to face with this person. We connected briefly. I'm like, are you? Do you know who that is? Scarlett Johansson. Yeah. Yeah, so Scarlett Johansson was, yeah, they had the interview area right there. So they come around the corner and, oh! And now, I remember it more like this. We connected very briefly. It was a really short fling. Few words were spoken. Actually, no words were spoken, but it was come around the corner, there's Scarlett Johansson. And that's our data team, and there's this is the day after the election. It's president. And through that, just the last few years, I've been doing some work with election officials, nonpartisan stuff. I had written some software to help figure out how to predict where lines are going to be in polling places. And they, for like 2008, 2012, they had some issues in a lot of places. So I wrote this simulation that let them, kind of based on their turnout and their equipment, here's times that are going to be problems, here's where you need to fix some problems. And they formed this Presidential Commission on Election Administration that I did a presentation at. And they adopted some of my software, and so I wound up working with Caltech and MIT, their voter technology project. And that's kind of what I've been doing lately, is a lot of data analysis with election officials. Wrote a little app where we can gather data from polling places. They can actually time how long it takes people to vote different ballots. We took hundreds of thousands of sample voters across the country with all kinds of different ballots, and developed some predictive software that they could use where, an election administrator, here's our ballot for this next coming election. How long is it going to take an average voter to vote this thing? And so we've got some pretty good predictive data now, so they can tell how long it's going to take voters to vote. They can use that simulation to see, if they're going to have problems and so on. And anyway, that's kind of stuff I've been doing lately. There we go. Yep. I'll be around through this evening and tomorrow morning for a bit. I need to head out a little before noon, but I'll hang out around the lobby area. If you have any questions and stuff, feel free to come and grab me if you want me to sign books or whatever you want to do. And I told you we'd have some question and answer time. Apparently I went longer than I thought. So question and answer time will be up in the lobby, whatever you want to buy, okay? So thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Come back here. We have a tradition here at KansasFest that we like to give a plaque to our speakers. We have the Apple II Forever Award for you as our guest speaker this year. So thank you so much for coming. All right.
Cool, thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for coming this year.
Thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it. I bore you too much.